I'm Michelle, and I want to welcome you to our first of 4 Regional ACE webinars for this academic year. Today's webinar is about Chaos Theory of Careers. It will be presented by Jon Schlesinger, the director of the Hiatt Career Center at Brandeis University. I'm Michelle Drantrack, a member of the marketing team here at GradLeaders. For those of you who aren't aware, GradLeaders is a relatively new brand. It's a result of the merger of 2 companies, MBA Focus and CSO Research. They've been in the industry for about 30 years. Over those 30 years, we've partnered with thousands of career centers to help connect millions of students to their dream jobs. We're more than just a career services and student recruitment software provider. We truly think of ourselves as partners with schools and employers and an extension of their office with a mutual goal. We love sharing best practices and creating opportunities for you all to learn from each other. And that's why we're excited to be working with the Regional ACEs again this year on this webinar series. A quick reminder before we get started, everyone has been automatically muted on entry. But if you have questions at any time throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat window within WebEx. And please be sure to send all of your questions to all panelists so we can all see them. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Jocelyn, who will introduce our presenter for today.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Jocelyn Coulter. I am the Director of Career Services on the Staten Island campus of St. John's University. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Eastern ACE Professional Development Committee. So we're the committee that kind of is handling the Eastern ACE webinars. So again, thank you so much for joining us today in this collaboration with GradLeaders. And so I just want to get this moving along, and I just want to briefly introduce Jon, who, as we already heard, is at the Hiatt Career Center. Jon has an M.Ed. in counseling from DePaul University, concentrating in community mental health and college student development. He's also a certified career counselor, an MBTI facilitator, and a StrengthsQuest educator. Jon writes and teaches about career development theory, one of which we're going to be hearing about in a minute, data analytics, and learning outcome assessments in career services. And he has a number of works published in peer-reviewed and National Association journals. So without further ado, we're just going to get the screen switched over, and Jon can take it away.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate that. I'm excited to be here with everybody to chat about chaos theory of careers. I'm a bit of a theory nerd, as you'll find out, so I'm really excited to be able to share this with folks today. And we'll get through a kind of an overview of chaos theory. I'm sure that there will be questions, and so I'm happy to answer those at the end of our presentation here. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the theory overview of chaos theory of careers. We're going to talk about how we can really utilize it from a counseling coaching perspective, and then we'll dive into some counseling and coaching interventions. Before we get started, I'd like to start with just a brief activity for folks. If you remember, maybe about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, the hashtag #first7jobs was very popular on Twitter. We saw it on LinkedIn, and it's been a great little activity, and I've used it a couple different times. We'll see how it works in a webinar here. But I'd like you to take a moment and just jot down, what were your first 7 jobs after college? Think about what were those first 7 activities. They could be paid or unpaid. What are the first 7 things you were doing? Some of you might be currently there before you get to number 7. That's okay. See if you can jot some of them down. Now take a second and just look at the list that you've been starting to put together. How many of them were planned out? How many of them were what we would call, accidental? You can start to think about how unplanned events have influenced your own career path. We work in career services, so I'm going to assume that this isn't necessarily a new idea for folks, right? We're going to be talking about a theory of career development and decision making, and it's really important to point out that this is not just theoretical. We've all experienced aspects of this theory, and we can take it back to our own experiences. We can really make it real for folks. And I found that that's really helpful as we start to talk to other people about the theory itself. So there are a couple of basic underlying assumptions of chaos theory of careers before we move forwards. The first assumption is the idea that career development does not occur in isolation. So all aspects of family, friends, culture, spirituality play a really important role. So do environmental systems as well as social and cultural systems. We can't think of career development as something that's isolated. In addition, planned and unplanned change unfolds in a nonlinear way. And what that's saying is that a small event can have a larger outsized impact. And as a result, 100% predictability is not only impractical, it's impossible, particularly as we're looking at long-term planning. And so as a result, comfort with uncertainty is really a core principle of chaos theory. So chaos theory of careers really emerges from math and science and the idea of viewing naturally occurring phenomenon. Now, the authors note that chaos is not a good name. They chose it to speak back to the origins of the theory itself. But a common misconception is the idea that chaos means disorder. Really, in this context, chaos is actually all about systems and patterns. And so let's make that real for a second. I'd like you to take a moment and imagine how you start your daily commute to work. If it helps, shut your eyes and imagine pulling out of the garage or stepping out of your house. Now run through your route to work. Think about where are you going? Where do you stop? How many different possible pathways are there? Think about what affects when you arrive at your destination. Traffic, weather, people. Now imagine you can sort of draw out your different routes to work. As we're thinking about them, recognize that each trip is subtly different from the last, right? But it could be similar to the previous. It's also inherently unpredictable, sometimes in ways you have not full control over, and small differences can dramatically affect the outcome of your commute, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in large or life-changing ways. And yet, as we look at the system that we're drawing, there's an order and a structure that begins to emerge. We can see chaotic systems all around us. The other prototypical example of a chaotic system is to look at weather. And so we know that careers are not linear. And for most people, those first 7 jobs really are just the beginning. But we don't want to give up. We want to look for systems and patterns. Chaos theory says that reality and career really are characterized by what's called an open system. And open systems simply describe patterns that are open and ready for dynamic change. So as counselors, as coaches and educators, our task is to help move people from being linear and closed thinkers to open systems thinkers. Now, closed thinkers tend to believe there's only one path. Maybe they have an idea that there's a career for life or just one choice. Maybe they teeter between 2 ideas, role conflict, career indecision. Maybe they're trying for control with predictable routines, trying the same things over and over again. In chaos theory, we talk about those as attractors. And attractors talk to us about how the system operates. So the idea of believing there's only one path is a point attractor. You're focused on a single goal. Now, these aren't necessarily bad. Point attractors work really well for short-term goals. I'm going to get up this morning and have breakfast. That works really well. I'm going to get up this morning and become an astronaut. That works less well, right? Sometimes what happens is when you're focused in that almost tractor beam-like effect, you have blinders on, and you fail to recognize things that are around us. And that's when we start to get stuck. Another attractor people find themselves in is this idea of a pendulum or a seesaw, bobbing back and forth between two different things. So the classic example of that is perhaps somebody who comes in and says, I'm interested in going to medical school, or I'm interested in going to law school, right? What they're really telling you as a career counselor is they're not really sure what they're interested in, but here are two things that they've heard of. The third there is called a tourist attractor, and that just refers to a mathematical model, but think of it as a racetrack. It's repetitive effort with no change. Applying for 1,000 jobs online and not understanding why they're not making progress. So those first three are all examples of closed systems. They're not allowing for new information. The fourth attractor is called the strange attractor, but it's an open system, and it's accessible for outside pieces of information. And open systems are really important because that's what allows for this idea of emergence to occur. An emergence is the occurrence of new order out of what were sort of looking like random events. This is the why chance plays such an important role in people's career development. But we want to be careful not to process this information too simplistically. Short-range predictions, as I mentioned, are reasonably accurate, but over time, they become less so. And so a classic example of this is the way we used to think about personality or interest assessments. In sort of the old trait and factor days, we might boil somebody's interest down to their three-letter Holland code. But we know that they're much more complicated and complex than that. And so while that information can be useful, we want to be careful not to process it too simplistically. Because when a new order emerges, we encounter what's called a phase shift. Or in other words, shift happens. That's how the chance events begin to radically alter the system. So think back to your own commuting example. That phase shift can happen in a small way. Maybe you missed a red light and careened into the intersection. Maybe it was something larger. Those little events can shift your system and shift them rather quickly. So chaos theory of careers utilizes these three C's as a way of describing their work. And we can kind of boil them down to complexity, chance, and change. So complexity describes all of the different factors involved in somebody's system. So as you think about all of the different factors that are involved in someone's career development, right? There is no one list we can go to that's going to detail everybody's factors. And everyone's going to take into account and weigh differently their factors. So complexity is referring to the complexity of factors that are involved in somebody's decision-making. Chance, as I've mentioned, is the idea of bringing chance into career development. There are a couple of other theories, happenstance being one of them, that talks about chance, but there are few theories like chaos theory that really hold chance as a central element of the theory. We've been talking about chance in different ways for a long time in career development. We've called it chance, serendipity, happenstance, but really recognizing that we can't ignore chance. It's not something that happens occasionally. It's a core function of the system. And the third C is really about change. And so the idea with change is simply recognizing that we do not live in a static world, that somebody's interests are going to change, the type of work we're going to do is going to change, and trying to make that long-term prediction based on the idea that we're going to be static doesn't really work in this changing dynamic work environment that students are facing anymore. Take a moment and think about what are the ways in which your own jobs have changed in the last couple of years? What are the new technologies or the new goals or initiatives? Introducing the idea of change in career development theory can be scary for some people. Change doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to or you have to change jobs. So a student who comes in and says, this is what I want to do, we don't necessarily have to discourage them from doing that, right? But we do want to open them up to the possibility that what they're doing or the way they're doing it or what they're interested in doing it might change and evolve a little bit over time. And so the 3 C's are complexity, chance, and change. And they fit into this basic elements of chaos theory. So we're talking about complex, dynamical systems. So that just means that they are full of multiple factors. They are dynamical. They're continuing to move. We can understand them through the different attractors, with the strange attractor being the best representation of reality and career development. We want to focus on emerging patterns, which require this open systems thinking, so thinking about what's out there. And the reason that that's so important is because it enables a phase shift for someone. So how the heck do we put this into practice? So let's talk a little bit about counseling or coaching from a chaos perspective and what might this look like. And I'm going to start with just a quick little reflection. I want you to think about when someone comes to your office to talk about changing their career path, think about what are the expectations you have for the outcomes of that first meeting, and what would mark that as a successful session. So take a moment if you can and just jot down some ideas. Think about what are some of the things that you come up with. Is it actually picking a career? Is that the expectation for a first meeting? Is it gaining insight into action? Is it self-awareness? Is it just getting to build rapport with the student who comes in? Theory is what's going to guide us and guide those outcomes and provide the interventions on how to get there. And so chaos theory takes a little bit of a different tack and approach than other perspectives. You know, I keep saying we really want to move away from that old linear matching idea, right? And so from a CTC perspective, some of those outcomes might include viewing the individual situation through a chaos frame, which means understanding where they are in that set of patterns, what attractor they're in, or what I describe as what C are they stuck in? Are they stuck because they don't understand the complexity? Are they stuck because they're hoping or expecting not to make a change? We want to help them see any emerging patterns and then figure out what the barriers are. Why are they not seeing them? What's the block there? We want to help them gain comfort with uncertainty. This is probably one of the most important ones and most ambiguous to try to help someone with. So we want to normalize the complex, unpredictable nature of career, and we want to help them get confidence in taking their next steps. So it's really about getting prepared and feeling confident, at least in the short term, because we know how difficult it is to talk about long-term goals and plan with 100% certainty. And so from a chaos perspective, I really think our session goals are very simply to see the emerging patterns, to begin to utilize open systems thinking, help students put themselves into the path of opportunity, and then begin to take action. So for me, the end of a successful session is a student who has the confidence to get started, recognizing they might not yet know where they're going, but if they have the confidence to begin, that's a good outcome. So as chaos practitioners, you'll all become experts at patterns. And we're going to explore 2 different types of patterns in particular. The first set of patterns we're going to look at are convergent patterns. These are things that focus on the probable, the stable, the measurable. It might include your traditional VIPs. It might include salary requirements, educational requirements. We want to help students recognize these and put them into context. The other set of patterns that we're really going to focus on are more of the emergent patterns. This is the surprising, the idiosyncratic, the possible. And these might come from parables or stories, from talking about meaning and their reaction to things. These patterns are also important because the complexity is about pattern recognition. And it really is a balance. We're going to go back and forth between looking at convergent and emergent ideas with somebody. So let's talk about some interventions. The first intervention around using chaos theory that we discovered a while ago is that we actually don't use the word chaos. It tends to provoke more anxiety for students than it does to alleviate things. And so just as when you go to your doctor, they generally don't tell you the Latin name of the operation that they're performing. They just tell you what it's going to involve and how it will affect them. Like other theories, we just jump into the actual interventions. And so I've broken these up into the 3 C's. So for complexity, the goals are really pattern identification, thinking about exploring some constants, and helping clients see the emerging order, and then correcting any barriers or maladaptive behaviors. And so there are a couple of things that work really well here, but I particularly gravitate personally towards the more constructivist type career interventions. And so one of the ones that I find is most helpful to start with is some kind of visual mapping exercise. And there are a lot of good ones that are described in the literature in different places. Kate Brooks has a book out where she talks about a wandering map. But these come from mind mapping ideas. They've been around for a while. But really it's about putting the ideas on paper, beginning to see the connections. And what I love about this is it's such a constructivist exercise. And so here are real examples from students that I've worked with. And these examples can look all sorts of different ways, but students get the value out of them from talking with someone and walking them through the map. And these become great activities for group appointments or for individual appointments. So they really help clients see that emerging order. The other constructivist intervention that I think works really well to help someone see the complexity are card sorts. Looking at card sorts of majors, of values, different interests. These are also really helpful. But there are a lot of different interventions, and one of the nice things about chaos theory is it is a framework. It's a way of understanding career development and career decision making. And so within that, you can utilize a lot of different interventions depending on what you're comfortable with. And so I've put a few down here, and at the end of the presentation, I've got my email address. I'm happy to share out the slides or the references for folks. A lot of things that are on here are really constructivist type interventions. And you'll notice assessments can also be really good. Assessments can be great constructivist interventions when they're not used too simplistically. So if we're using the MBTI or Strong or StrengthsQuest or other types of assessments to help students give students the vocabulary to describe what they're interested in, then I think they can work really well. So the goals really there are about pattern identification. When it comes to helping students with chance, we really want to help them learn how to view risk a little bit differently. And as I mentioned, really put themselves into opportunities where they can learn a little bit more. So I've got a quick questionnaire for you. We'll see how this works on a webinar. But let's take a minute and we'll go through them one at a time. So, have you ever made a decision with an unintended outcome? Have you ever felt you were in the right place at the right time? Has an event you didn't plan for had a big impact on your life? Have events outside your control ended up being more important to you? This is just part of what's called the reality checking exercise. And it's a fun little activity that you can do. I've done it in classes before. You can do it individually as just conversation topics. But these are really great for exactly what the title is. It's kind of reality checking. So helping even a first-year student recognize that chance has probably already played a significant role in their own development, whether that's of the university they've selected, the courses, the clubs and activities, and then talking about how we can apply that to the broader career development, career decision-making frame. We can also utilize other questions and activities. Happenstance learning theory has some great questions to help students begin to recognize how chance has played a role within their lives. In addition to happenstance learning theory, the solution-focused interviewing questions are also really great. You know, I think a lot of what we are doing as counselors is really solution-focused brief therapy. And so the identifying the problem, finding exceptions, scaling questions, the classic miracle question can work really well in this example to help students identify chance events and how they've been connected to them. The other resource that I find really helpful for working with students to help them explore chance and really put themselves in situations where they can learn more is an adaptation of what I call a next steps map. And it's basically starting with the big themes that come up from a mind map. So in this example, big themes someone is interested in: leadership, teamwork, and creativity. And they want to know, how can I break this down? How do I make it more actionable? And what we start to do is we start to brainstorm, what are your next steps? Where else can you go to get this information? And starting to break these categories down until they're a bit smaller so they become actionable things that they can go out and do. So, you know, leadership is a big category. We know students are interested in leadership. It's something employers are interested in. But really breaking that down into what's something they can get started with tomorrow that we can follow up with them. So think about how they can get experience in those situations. And again, it's a nice constructivist intervention because it can look a lot of different ways. And you can use it from a lot of different perspectives. But overall, with chance, the goals are to view risk differently and help students learn to put themselves into situations where they can learn a little bit more. And so the interventions that work really well there, I think, are the next steps map, that reality checking exercise. There's also another great exercise from Pryor and Bright called luck readiness, which is really nice. It's an assessment to help assess clients' flexibility, optimism, risk, curiosity, persistence, and luckiness in career exploration. So again, it can be something that's done in a group, or it's something that might be helpful to utilize one-on-one, as well as happenstance and the solution-focused interviewing are useful. Change is a difficult area for students to wrap their heads around occasionally. The goals here are really, as I mentioned, about how do you become comfortable enough to be open to exploration. And there are a lot of different ways to go about this. But let's try another activity together if we can. I want you to find a blank piece of paper. I'm going to hope everyone has one. Okay, in a moment, I'd like you to sign your name as many times as you can in 30 seconds. Hoping everybody's ready. Okay, go. Go ahead and sign your name just like you would a signature, sign an autograph, signing a credit card receipt. See how many times you can sign your name in 30 seconds. Quickly see if you can fill up the page. There's a prize for the person who gets done, who fills it up the most. Give you another 5 seconds. And stop. Pencils down. Okay. I want you to take a look at the very first signature that you wrote and your very last signature. What's similar or different about them? Hopefully, you used the same letters. Maybe you even put them in the same order from the first one to the last. But odds are they don't look exactly the same, right? There's some change that goes on there. And yet there's a consistency in the pattern. And that's what we want to help students access. So think about what it felt like to find that last signature. Were you nervous? Were you scared? Probably not. It was probably something that you've done fairly often, right? And that's where we want to get students to help them become comfortable enough with taking that next step. So the signature exercise is actually one of those interventions that works really well in large groups. It works well in small groups. But when working with somebody who is feeling a little stuck, feeling a little anxious about moving forwards and trying out change, the signature exercise can be a great place to start. We want to try to not create more anxiety for our students. We want them to have just enough anxiety that they're ready to move forwards. Other really great resources for interventions are bibliotherapy, informational interviews. This is where going and getting somebody out to talk to people can be incredibly useful. But for a lot of students, that early networking is very difficult. And so even going to people in the field that are doing something they're interested in to find out what are the other things they've done before that can be really useful. I recently did the First 7 Jobs activity with a group of faculty and talked to them about sort of where they've been to versus where they had come from or where they had started, and talk about how can we utilize that more in conversations with students. It's easy for students to get wrapped up in seeing, professors or adults, their parents, people in authority, as having just started in that place. But as we remind students all the time, nobody starts in the boardroom, right? And so helping them see the progression that other people have gone through can be an incredibly powerful tool to recognize how they themselves can get started. And so some of the interventions for change, the signature exercise, there's a description of it in Pryor and Bright. We also talk about psychoeducation. And so coming up with the right language to talk about what we're doing or what we're looking for. I often tell students that we're looking for fuzzy goals. We're trying to plan things just over the horizon, right? When doing presentations to first-year students or parents, I often talk about the questions that we ask. And so the classic question everybody asks you when you're going to school is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which is a terrible question, right? There are a few obvious things wrong with that question. The two things that most people point out is, one, the idea that you have to grow up, which I take issue with, and the idea that you only get to be one thing. And so the better question to start asking our students is, what are you interested in now? What are you interested in doing now? What is your 2 to 3 year plan, not your 5 to 10 year plan? Because as we talked about, that's more difficult to predict with some certainty. But 2 to 3 years is a much more accessible time frame. And so that's a fuzzy goal for somebody. Other constructivist interventions, things like the career construction interview from Mark Savickas, can be really useful to illustrate change that you have gone through and situate that within your own narrative. Bibliotherapy, contemporary examples. I have a career education model that I've written about. Having some way to talk about the evolution of change and interest is a useful tool for people. Okay, that was a lot of detail in a relatively short period of time. In a moment, I'm going to start talking about how we can put this all together But if you have questions, if you want to put them into the Q&A box, not the, sorry, if you want to put them into the chat box, not the Q&A box, the chat box, then Jocelyn will begin to collect them, and we can kind of talk about them and address them as we wrap up. But let's talk about how do we put it all together. So I've got a couple of typical statements that students often give us as they're sitting down, and I want you to think about what attractor or what C this might be representing. And let's see how we do. Okay, tell me what I can do with my major. Hopefully that's a pretty typical question that folks get. Take a moment and think about what attractor are they stuck in? All right, if you had guessed point attractor, go ahead and give yourself a point. They are focused on the wrong question. It's not what can I do with my major, it's what am I interested in? Let's open them up to exploration. Let's look at what else is around them first, as opposed to putting the blinders on and focusing too narrowly on a particular outcome. This next one should be easy. I'm thinking about law school or I'm thinking about medical school. Where are they? If you said that pendulum attractor, that's right. They're stuck going back and forth, and we really want to do what we can to open them up. Sometimes what I'll do for students that are really stuck between two things like this is I will actually draw out the pendulum for them on a sheet of paper and just illustrate that we're really going back and forth between these two different ideas, and let's break that system. Let's see what else is around there. And of course, law school and medical school are what I think of as classic statements for someone who really isn't sure what they're doing and is hoping that if they just use some words that they've heard, you will figure out how you can help them. So we want to break them from that pendulum. How about this one? I've been applying for hundreds of jobs online, but I'm getting no interviews. Think about what system they're stuck in. Applying for hundreds of jobs, not getting interviews, they're going around and around, they're stuck in that tourist attractor, right? So it's like they're on a racetrack. They're always making a left turn, and they can't see that there are other ways to go about this, right? So we want to help them begin to break out of that racetrack and that cycle and explore alternatives. Okay, last one. How about this question? What will be the best choice for me? Can't you just tell me what will be the best choice? What do you think? So there's a bit of a trick. They can be stuck in any of them. They can be stuck focused on not focused on the complexity. They could be stuck focusing not by looking at the chance that might happen to them or recognizing that there are going to be changes. I can't give them an answer for the best choice because that's going to change over time. And so this is the first part of starting to see where they are in the system. We want to help students recognize their nonlinear career path. But career development is inherently action-oriented. So we provide a theoretical perspective to really align outcomes and interventions, and I think chaos theory does one of the best jobs yet of describing how careers are developed or acquired, but that doesn't mean we just spend all of our time reflecting with students. This is really an active process, and so there's only so much conversation that we're going to have with students before they need to go out into the world and experience something to bring that back into the conversation. And so I'll leave you with the Zen conclusion that I like to remind our students, that career is not a linear path with a start and an end, but to be on that path is to complete it. Or to put it in more concrete terms, as Crumbold states, the goal of career counseling is to help clients learn or prepare to take action, not simply to make one occupational decision, but to gain the tools for lifelong career development. And so I think chaos theory does a great job of putting a real framework around these ideas to provide students with that information so that we can really be seen as lifelong educators and partners with our students, as opposed to people doling out advice or job search information. There are a couple of great resources just to share with you, and a shameless plug. Pryor and Bright's 2011 book on the chaos theory of careers goes into a bit more depth and summarizes their previous research. There are 2 articles to share. One of them is about applying chaos theory as a framework in college career centers. And another one was the NACE article from 2016 about utilizing career development models. I'm also happy to talk with folks in more depth about how to apply this or talk about other career development chaos theories as they fit into the context. And so I'll leave you with my email address. I'm happy to answer additional questions if you would like a copy of the slides or would like specific references or more information about discussing consulting options and things like that. Please feel free to shoot me an email. And while that's up, we'll check in with Jocelyn and see what kinds of questions we have.
Michelle, I'm not sure if anything has come in on your end. I'm not seeing anything on mine. So just a reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions, please make sure you're putting them in the chat area, and please make sure you're sending them to either all panelists or all participants so that we can all see the different questions. So I guess we'll just leave this up for a minute or two and see if anybody has any questions.
Sounds good. I didn't have any come in either, so if anybody has any, just be sure to type them in that chat window for us. Oh, there's one for you, Jocelyn.
Okay. All right, so from Angie, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this right, but Angie Mackay, it says, how long are your advising appointments, and also do you have a lot of repeat visits using this?
Awesome, excellent question. So since our office has moved towards this model as a framework for all of our interventions, we do a little bit of a mix between 30-minute appointments, which are generally focused more on getting people in the door, quick questions, an introduction to the office, and resume reviews, that sort of thing. And then the majority of the appointments are still hour-long appointments around career exploration, internship search, graduate school application materials. One of the great things is we have actually seen, although the total number of individuals has been going down, their unique number of individuals coming in has been going up. And so we're looking at that and looking at the data from the outcome assessments that we do after sessions to see that the students that are coming in are getting what they need in a shorter period of time. And that's really the mark that I'm using. So the students are getting what they need, and they're leaving feeling satisfied, feeling ready for those next steps. And so those are the metrics that I'm using. I saw another question come in here about resources for learning chaos theory. There are a couple of good resources that are out there. When we worked with our staff to talk about the theory, we broke this down, and over the series of several weeks, we did some book reviews, we chatted about different topics, we had people present on different areas. That was really helpful because it worked with everybody's different learning style. But the 2 books that I would recommend the most to start with are the Pryor and Bright book on the chaos theory of careers. This is a great book. It's as I mentioned, a kind of a culmination of their work and their research, but it's written for a little bit more of an academic audience. And then the other book that's really good is Kate Brooks' book about You Majored in What? Kate Brooks' book about, I was trying to remember the title. It's Kate Brooks' book, You Majored in What, is written more for kind of a high school, college level audience. And so the mix of those two was really helpful for our staff in figuring out how to put this into context.
Okay, so, yeah, any other questions?
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and apologize again for the little rough start we had with the link for the connectivity, but we will be sending out a recording to everyone who purchased a ticket, so if you missed the first couple minutes, you will be able to get that via recording. Don't forget to sign up for our next Regional ACE webinar, which is in December. And GradLeaders will be at the Southern ACE and Mountain Pacific ACE conferences in December, so be sure to stop by and say hello to us there. So thank you so much, Jocelyn and John. We really appreciated your presentation today, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody,
for joining in.